Hello everybody and welcome to Nathan on Shuffle, and I've got a really exciting show for you guys. This is a show I do about once a month where I round up the latest albums that I've been listening to and enjoying and that I feel like are worthy recommendations for all of you out there who have similar tastes to me. This is quite an eclectic group of music. I like to call it my new music shuffle to basically promote the idea that this is just a random assortment of albums that I enjoyed listening to over the course of the last month or so. And so let's dive into some of these albums. I'm going to try to hit on these pretty quickly because I know these shows can tend to be pretty lengthy, but I want to give a pretty good description of the album and compare it to some things and give you an impression of if it's something that is worth your time or interest, and then move on to the next one. This show is actually a bit bloated because I have a lot of albums to cover. I didn't do a new music shuffle show at the end of July, so this basically covers all the albums I've been listening to throughout July and August. So much albums, in fact, that I decided to split it up into two different parts. So this is really part one, and I'll get into part two in a future week. So I'm separating them out by a week just to give you time to catch up on these albums if you want to check them out before getting into the next slate of albums. So there's really 10 albums that I want to talk about, so it's going to be 5 and 5. So here's my list of the first 5 of the albums that I want to get into. So number 1 on my list is Midi and the album Hellfire. This was released in the middle of July. Midi are a London-based band who burst on the music scene in 2018 with an experimental post-punk, avant-jazz, math rock combination. Definitely virtuosity on board with these guys and a great edge to their sound. Really surprising for such a young set of musicians. These guys are basically just out of high school. They're in really a young age, but they're really showcasing a mastery of their instruments and doing things that are wildly creative and inventive. The band consists of Jordy Greep on vocals and guitar, Matt Kwasniewski-Kelvin on vocals and guitar, Cameron Picton, vocals, bass guitar, and synths, and Morgan Simpson on drums. Their name is derived from Japanese music genre, Black Midi, so really interesting group. And this is an album, I was a little apprehensive to check out this album because I know they're a bit wild. I've heard tracks from them before, and I wasn't sure it would be to my taste because I tend to like things that are more straightforward musically, that are more in line with the classic 70s progressive rock style sound, and this is definitely not that. But listening to this album, I was just really captivated and really felt excited for this new band to take this mantle of an exciting new prog development. You know, we've been in this sort of third wave of prog for quite some time, and this may herald in a new age of interesting prog music that's taking things in a very different direction. It's always exciting to me to see a young, youthful group of musicians taking on this more adventurous style music and going beyond just the typical style that you might hear in mainstream music. You know, they're really going out of their way to do something more adventurous and different. And that's always exciting to me. It shows there might be long-term hope for the genre that I love so dearly, that it won't die off with all these older bands retiring and such, that there's a youthful group that can keep on this adventurous nature of music that I love so much. And so I'm really excited for them, and they've really cobbled together a really diverse group of songs. To me, their sound, it feels like it's always on the verge of descending into madness, but they're always able to keep it structured and keep the plot even throughout all these mad, chaotic pieces. So it's a really fascinating way that they compose music. This is somewhat of a concept album, I believe, so all the tracks run right into the next, and it's a fairly compact album. It's not very long at all. It's actually under 40 minutes, so it's a really good album that you can just sit through in one sitting and really absorb and listen to each of the various tracks that go through so many different moods and styles. Hellfire is such a great introduction with a cacophony of sound and these fast-spoken vocals. Feels like a demented circus almost feel to it. The vocals is an interesting part of it, which is something that initially drove me away from the band because they can tend to not be very melodic, can be very this fast-talking sort of style with these lyrics that are just coming at you a million miles per hour, and it's hard to decipher all of the meaning behind them on a first run, and you kind of have to look up the lyrics and kind of figure out what they're talking about. But it's really interesting and unique, and really, as I've listened to it more, I've come to appreciate it and the skill involved with that style of vocals. Sugar Sue starts with this announcer announcing a fight scenario before it sets into more of a loungy sort of vibe, and then the playing gets really furious and frenetic and keeps moving at that pace for quite some time. Once again, that organized chaos sort of feel. Eat Men Eat has a bit of an acoustic flavor, but still keeps that frenetic and intricate pace. A bit more laid back vocals compared to that quick talking style in this one. Sort of a demented western epic with layers of crazy fusion and added wild horns on top of it. Welcome to Hell starts with a funky drum beat and a strange guitar figure before we get those talky vocals once again. Quirky oddball vibe here, but really insanely interesting and has somewhat of an epic feel. I'm reminded sometimes of the quirkiness of something like Frank Zappa or even King Crimson at their most avant-garde and strange. Really interesting, crazy stuff. Still comes in and gives you more of a laid-back feel, maybe even a western vibe, but with some sax over top to give you a little bit of a breather from these really intense songs that have come before it. But it has a really great groove and that laid-back singing style that they can get into sometimes. The race is about to begin starts with a loud burst of energy and interesting guitar stabs, some super fast talking halfway through, really crazy style. The second half is a bit more laid back in that jazzy, loungy style that they can do, but still has that disturbing style feel to it. They really do that well. They have this chaotic, fast, frenetic pace, these fast-talking vocals, but then they can also settle into a more loungy, jazzy feel with a different style in the vocals to add that different variety. Dangerous Liaisons is more of a ballad, laid-back type track compared to some of the more frenetic songs. Once more, those jazzy, loungy vocals are in there with acoustic guitar, leading to some great piano and sax lines that once again gets more intense as the song continues. 27 Questions that ends the album has such a great energy and off-kilter vibe with keyboard stabs and quick talking vocals. Has this almost musical theater bouncy vibe at times towards the end. Really interesting, a bit disconcerting with some really strange piano bits and different things, but all in all, just a really creative, captivating, interesting album that I can't help but recommend, and I think it's going to rank highly on my year-end list of albums, despite my better judgment. It's just, I can't help myself but to be captivated and interested by what they're doing and to keep listening and to keep unpacking all these intricate musical things that they're doing. So really a great album if you're willing to go into that more adventurous lane and look for something more experimental, something that maybe leans more into that punk sort of aesthetic but has a lot of eclectic nature in it and some jazzy stuff. Really check this one out, see what you think. So have to recommend that one at the start of the show. Now we're moving into something almost the complete opposite direction. This is the album Born by the band Birth. And so Birth is a musical entity that is coming out of the ashes of a band called Astra from San Diego, California. So the new band features former members Brian Ellis on guitar and keys and Connor Riley on guitar, keys, and vocals, and brings in Trevor Mast on bass and drummer Paul Maroney, completing that lineup. So the four have worked together before, but this is their first official album together, full-length album. And once again, it's a shorter album, so it's a nice, palatable experience, but it's, instead of this adventurous, crazy, frenetic prog from Black Midi, this is more of a retro-style, psychedelic feel, like you're being placed right back into the late 60s, early 70s. Even the production of the album feels like it was created with that in mind. Like, it sounds like, if I just heard this out of context, I would think it was some forgotten late 60s, early 70s prog album that I had just never heard before from an obscure group. I wouldn't have predicted that it was something more modern and something that came out this year. In fact, I played one of the singles from it for my wife and asked her to predict what year this came from, and she said, like, I don't know, 70, 71 or something like that, and she was pretty surprised when I told her, no, this is actually from this year. So they really embrace that old school style sound, even in the production values of the music. So, and I have mixed feelings about that a little bit, because I tend to like more of a modern production, and I feel like it can feel a bit muddied when they try so hard to emulate something that's older. I don't know if it's quite my favorite style, but they do it really well. And if you're really nostalgic for that period of music, it can really bring back those same feelings that you probably felt when listening to that material back in the late 60s, early 70s. So I can see why they do it, but I just wonder how it would sound if they updated it to sound more modern, and how that could actually infuse a bit more energy and interest into the music, at least from my perspective. But that's not what they're doing. They're doing a more retro style sound on purpose. They're trying to sound like a band that came from the 60s or 70s. And so there's this total heavy, spacey psych vibe that really permeates throughout the record. There's a lot of instrumental passages. There's some singing on certain tracks, but I think the focus is more on this retro style instrumental sections. Really, really great stuff. Born is the perfect opening track in this retro prog style. Feels plucked right out of the late 60s, early 70s proto prog and psychedelia, with some great vintage keyboard sounds and expressive guitar playing. So you kind of get to know exactly what sound you're in for right from the bat, which I think is a really good indication of what to expect from the album. Descending Us adds vocals into the mix. You get some great spacey grooves and soaring guitar bits. Feels a bit like early Deep Purple, Like a Child in Time was brought to mind as I was listening to this track. It leads to some extended soloing and feels a bit spacey as it leads towards the end. For Yesterday is a great vintage track with some great organ work. I like the groove that begins Cosmic Tears, which is maybe one of my favorite tracks on the album. I love the cool expressive synth line that veers almost into a jazz fusion style direction. Great instrumental. I really love this track. I think it really personifies what the band is doing well here. Another Time is a great solid jam. Some hard-hitting sections going between almost a proto-metal type feel to more dreamy soundscapes. And then Long Way Down really ends the album with energy and excitement, with some great screaming guitar solos to cap out everything off. So all in all, a really great record, especially if you like that psychedelic space rock sort of sound from the late 60s, early 70s. It really leans hard into that influence. Maybe I wished it was a little bit more modern sounding and wished the tracks were a little bit more fully formed. I feel like a lot of these tracks end somewhat abruptly, and I was expecting them to go on a bit longer or have a bit more to them. But all in all, it's a really promising debut album from a cool new retro group that I think if you like this style of prog, you'll really be digging and really be into. So definitely a recommendation. Don't take my minor criticisms too much to heart, because it's more of a personal preference thing, and people who are really into the style are just really going to fall in love with this. So definitely recommend that one. Moving on, I want to get into an album called Asking for a Friend by the band Umphrey's McGee. Now, Umphrey's McGee is a band I've always really fallen in love with. I really like their sound and style. They're not purely a progressive rock band, but they definitely have progressive rock leanings. But they're more of what you'd call a jam band, similar to something like Fish or Grateful Dead or something like that, but more updated into a more modern style sound. And they really throw a lot of influences into the pot of what they do. There's some jazz influences, there's some funk influences, some folk influences, some just basic rock and roll. You know, it's all weaved together into this really interesting style with some infectious melodies, thought-provoking lyrics, and really great harmonies and blistering musicianship. So it all is really a great package that brings together a lot of styles that I really like. And so while it's not pure prog, it has definitely touchstones of that in some of their more extended pieces. And a lot of these pieces on these albums that they craft are good frameworks that they use for their concerts. Where they really shine is in the live arena, and they take these blueprints of these songs they craft for their albums and really extend them and create these jam moments and these really extended solos and great things. So really, if you want to hear what they're known for and hear the style of sound that really takes them to the next level, you have to hear these pieces live and see what they do with them. But I'm a fan of the albums as well, because they're just really well crafted, interesting albums with some great sounds. Now, I'll admit that this isn't my favorite album of theirs. I think they've done better work in prior albums, but I still really had a great time with it and still would really recommend it, especially if you're a fan of this band and a fan of music that takes in a lot of different influences, maybe has a bit of a pop or rock basic structure, but can pull in different pieces from different genres to beef up the sound just slightly and give a different edge to it. Like I said, I think they bring in more of a prog influence on earlier albums, so if you're looking for the most proggy stuff that they've done, you probably want to look back to something like Mantis, but you've really got an interesting slate of songs here that are all super catchy, super fun to listen to, and sometimes it's nice to just have an album you can put on and just lay back and enjoy and get caught up in the catchy hooks and the great grooves and the instrumentation. And so that's what this album does for me. It starts off with I Don't Know What I Want, which is an upbeat, sunny pop influenced track that gets things started on a fun note. Small Strides is a great single, a great example of this infectious pop melody and influence. Always October has a laid-back groove and a really pleasant sound. Fenced In starts with a quirky, funky beat that runs throughout the track and is a fun highlight. New Wings is another lighter, poppier song that's just a joy to listen to. So these early tracks are much more leaning on the pop influence. A lot of them were early singles for the album, but it gets more into the meat of the song once we get into stuff like Hiccup, which has almost a reggae vibe to it in its main beat. Pure Saturation, which adds some 80s synth. It's Not Your Fault adds a heavier riff, bringing in a little bit of a more metallic influence before laying back into some more groovy style verses. How About Now has some really sweetly played acoustic guitar with some slide guitar, giving a bit of a country flavor. Ordinary Times is one of my favorite tracks on the album. Really cool riff that just sticks in my brain. Definitely has a bit of proggy influences on display in this piece. So really a cool one that I would recommend checking out if you're really looking for a track to personify the album. And Work Sauce really closes the album with a great, cool groove. So really, by and large, you get a great smattering of different things here. Some great grooves, some pop sensibilities, some really catchy hooks, little bits of different influences from reggae, from 80s synth pop, from country, from prog, from a little bit of metal side. You know, you get a bunch of different things to really add to this stew that they're crafting of different influences. So definitely would recommend that one if you like this band, if you like the jam band style sound, if you're looking for a poppier rock record that has some different influences in the makes. This is definitely a fun one to check out that I would recommend also. Now we get into an album that was a lot of fun to listen to as well, that came out also in July. This is Derek Sherinian's solo album Vortex. Derek Sherinian is, of course, an American keyboardist known for a pretty prolific career. He played with Dream Theater for a short stint, has played on many other projects such as Planet X and Platypus. He's been on tour with many very classic musicians, Billy Idol, Alice Cooper, Alice in Chains, so he's been around the block and played with a lot of notable musicians. Now he's part of the newer prog metal supergroup Sons of Apollo, where he's with Bumblefoot and Mike Portnoy and Jeff Scott Soto, playing some incredible music with them. So he's been around the block and he's done a lot in the progressive metal sphere, adds a bit of a jazz fusion style touch to his playing, and he's really an expert craftsman and a virtuoso on his instrument. And so this album is a great display of that. It's really just him being able to express his sound and style and really being able to lean into this virtuoso playing with a lot of different variations and a lot of different styles and sounds here. And what I found really cool about this album is that he has a lot of guest musicians on board. A lot of guest guitarists play throughout several of these different tracks, and he really gives each of these guest guitarists a chance to shine. He doesn't overtake the spotlight too much, even though it is a keyboard-driven record and it is his solo record, so of course you're going to hear lots of keyboard solos and lots of interesting things in that regard, but he also leaves space for these different guitarists to shine as well. So it's a really great, hard-hitting instrumental jazz fusion record with a great metal edge and a variety of really excellent guitar guest stars. You know, it's a really tasteful exploration into his style, and there's just so much energy and fun and musical diversity throughout the album, showing all his influences from prog to jazz to funk and even to metal. So really cool album. If you're into the more instrumental progressive metal style, this is definitely one to check out. The instrumentals take you on such a fascinating journey that, you know, I've talked about on the channel that I'm not really a huge fan of purely instrumental music, but there's certain exceptions where the music is so adventurous and fun that it takes you on a journey and you sort of forget that there's no vocals, you know, because it's taking you on this really interesting ride through a lot of different soundscapes, and the soloing really helps to add a voice in a different way. You know, the instruments are speaking in their own way through the instrumental soloing and playing. So really it starts with two strong, hard-hitting rockers with the Vortex and Firehorse. Really cool guitar solos from Steve Stevens on the first track and Nuno Betancourt on the second track. Scorpion really leans into a jazz flavor with some really tasty, groovy keyboard and piano playing. Seven Seas has more of a spacey feel in the keyboard, accompanied by a little bit of a more funky backbone. Keyline Blues really embraces this funk flavor in a big way with a tasteful guitar solo from Steve Lukather. Really incredible track. Die Cobra introduces some Middle Eastern influences with some sitar in the opening section before melding into a very metal style riff as it continues. Nomad's Land resides firmly in the jazz fusion style camp with some fluid grooves and impressive jazzy soloing, and everything ends with Aurora Australis, which really leans into the prog influences for a really extended, over 11 minutes of some really tasteful piano that gets more intense and jazzy as it goes about. Some bubbling synth is introduced underneath, and it really has this cool, intricate proggy opening with some great layers to it. And a heavier riff comes on board that adds more energy and more heaviness to the song, leading to some shredding from none other than Bumblefoot himself from the Sons of Apollo project. So really a cool album with a lot of cool variation within the jazz, metal, prog spectrum, and just had a lot of fun with it, and would highly recommend it to people who like the prog metal, jazz fusion, instrumental type music. So really strong recommendation, and hope you guys check that one out as well. And then the final one for today before I close and get ready for the next 5 for next week. This is an album called New Lives for Rent from Nothing in Writing. Nothing in Writing is a neo-progressive rock band, combining creative melodies and harmonies with tasteful grooves. Similar to bands you might compare it to, like Riverside, Toto, King's X, Porcupine Tree, even Journey, Tears for Fears. I've heard Enchant as a big reference. So I don't really hear as much of the prog influence, if I'm being perfectly honest. I hear more of AOR, melodic rock type feel, which I think is in line with a lot of those bands that they cite as influences. Enchant, Tears for Fears, Journey. Those are the types of things. Toto is a really big sound I hear. If you like those style of bands and a more melodic style rock with some interesting playing and really great vocals and great melodies, then this is for you. This is a really great, strong album. Nothing in Writing is a band from Washington State in the USA. Lineup is just a duo: Sean Thompson on guitar, bass, keys, and vocals, and Dan Blackson on drums and vocals. What really drew me into the band is I know Sean Thompson from his work with the prog metal band Odd Logic, which is a band I really, really like. So if you like Odd Logic, this is an interesting side project from the main singer of Odd Logic. So this is a really cool group. Once again, it's very melodic sounding, very AOR tinged neo-prog, really strong guitar playing with great vocals. Nothing too overtly proggy here, but really strong, great playing that I really enjoyed. It's just a pleasant listen with some great melodies and really well-crafted songwriting. New Life is a great, powerful, strong opener. Roads Below and The Getaway are solid rock tracks with good choruses and great sounding guitars. Virtual Fall is when we get into more of a great ballad with a big singable chorus. Love the piano opening that gives way to a more rock beat and ringing guitar. This is a great highlight of the record I would recommend listening to. Home Again is the longest track on the record. Gives some great bass grooves, expressive guitars, and sublime harmony vocals. Really great track to enjoy. Moment in Time is a great hard rocking track with great vocals. A great instrumental section halfway through that almost dabbles in that prog metal style, so you get a bit of that proggy sort of feel here. It's really killer stuff. I really enjoy it. Alien Sky Limits is a more instrumental track, a great harder edge track with some excellent guitar riffs. Really shows their chops. As I say, there's not a lot of proggy instrumental fireworks here. It is there in bits and doses and shows you that they really are great players and great at their instruments. They're just more tasteful about their approach on this album of just really focusing on the melodies and really focusing on the music itself. And so I think that's a good approach and makes it for a satisfying listen. Here and Alive is the final track, a solid closer, really personifies the album to me, of just a really killer chorus and some great soaring guitar work, making for an uplifting ending to a really solid, cool album that if you like that AOR melodic rock style of bands like Enchant and Toto and King's X and those style bands with a bit of a hard edge to it and some almost near metal riffing, this could be for you. It's a really beautiful album, really strong stuff, and a great set of songs. So really enjoy this one. So a great selection of 5 really strong records that I would recommend to you guys if you like the styles and the descriptions that I gave. So thank you guys so much for joining me on this journey. I love doing these episodes. I hope you enjoy watching them as well, and that it gives you some cool, interesting new albums to check out. If you've already checked out all these albums, maybe it'll allow you to hear someone else's thoughts and to get a different opinion about what these albums are like from someone. So please let me know in the comments any albums from the last couple months that you would like to see me talk about or that you were really interested in. And some of them, who knows, might show up in my next episode. So stay tuned for part 2 of this New Music Shuffle show. That'll be coming next week, I believe, depending on how much time it takes to edit and get it out there. So it'll be a whole new slate of great recommendations for you guys in the world of prog. So just as usual, keep enjoying the music, and hopefully you have a fun time with whatever music you've got going on in your life. So thank you guys so much, and I'll catch you hopefully in the next one. Bye.